Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name's Marissa and I like to talk about books and book design. And on January 10th, I turned 25 years old. To celebrate, I'm going to be telling you the 25 books I want to read before I die. And my birthday wish is to read all these books before I die. Now, this list is different from a typical yearly TBR because I'm not going to sit there and read through this whole list. I truly see myself reading them over the span of my whole lifetime. That being said, a lot of the books on this list are classics or just really heavy books that I wouldn't really want to consume back to back to back. This is a list of books that I would truly be devastated if I did not read before I died. So let's just get into it. Number 1. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This story is known for having some of the most memorable characters in all of literature, and as a character-loving girly, that is very enticing to me. It follows a woman named, you guessed it, Anna Karenina, who has a safe, established life married to this man named Karenin, and the story follows her as she leaves that stability to pursue a passionate affair with the much younger Count Vronsky. I love a good historical period piece just full of drama. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of these characters. And I also just have a general interest in Russian literature, so what better place to start? Number 2. The Shining by Stephen King. I am a Stephen King girly, and it's actually criminal that I haven't read this one. I feel like I can confidently say this is his most popular book, so I truly don't know why I haven't read it yet. Maybe just because it is so iconic that it's something to look forward to. The Shining is the story of Jack Torrance as he is employed at the infamous Overlook Hotel during its off-season, but the Overlook Hotel is very old and mysterious and full of sinister forces. So as they become more isolated during their very unusual stay, insanity increases, I suppose you could say. Number 3, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Some have said this is the scariest book of all time. I'll be the judge of that. I am so interested in this book because it is well known for having a bizarre format, which is a graphic designer's dream. I am so excited to learn how the design of these pages influences the overall horror of the story. House of Leaves is the story of this family who moves into a new home and quickly discovers something is very wrong. The house appears to be bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. I've heard this is just a super bizarre book. There's creatures in the walls and terrifying abysses in the closet. It seems like a book that I truly just need to dedicate a long period of time to fully immerse myself in. Number 4, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This is the epic tale of wrongful imprisonment, adventure, and revenge. Edmond Dantes is thrown in prison for a crime he did not commit. And while he's in prison, he learns about the treasure on the Isle of Monte Cristo. So not only does he plan to escape, but he plans to find this treasure and use it to plot the downfall of the 3 men who wrongfully imprisoned him. I am one of the pettiest people alive. If someone ever wrongfully imprisoned me, I would ruin their life. So I just know I'm gonna love this story. Number 5, Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I love Fredrik Backman. I have read A Man Called Ove and Anxious People so far. I just love his writing. Beartown follows a small town with big dreams. Sort of the whole tight-knit community revolves around their junior hockey team. And their junior hockey team is about to compete in the national semifinals, which could bring about big change to this town. But unfortunately, at that event, a violent act is committed against a young girl, which leaves the town left in turmoil. Not a single resident is left unaffected. Number 6, Bunny by Mona Awad. Well, of course. Bunny has appeared on literally every single one of my TBR videos. No, I still have not read it, but I'll be darned. I'm gonna read it before I die. Yep, I can promise you that much. Bunny follows this girl, Samantha, who is at school for an MFA program somewhere in New England. She is somewhat of a loner, maybe an outcast, and she is utterly repelled by the girls in her writing cohort who call each other Bunny. That is until, of course, they invite her to one of their secret group hangout things. From there, everything just gets crazy. And the reason I've put it off for so long is because I truly think it could be a new favorite book of all time, and that just makes me so nervous because what if I don't enjoy it as much as I have led myself to believe I will? Number 7, The Martian by Andy Weir. I think this is the only sci-fi book on the list, and that's fair because I'm not the biggest sci-fi reader. I know a lot of people who have read this and they aren't sci-fi readers themselves and they've still really enjoyed it. It follows the story of Mark Watney, the first ever astronaut to walk on Mars and potentially the first astronaut to die on Mars. He is left stranded on Mars when this huge dust storm comes, nearly kills him, and forces his team to evacuate. But Mark is not one to just give up. He is willing to fight against all odds and try to make his way back home. It's not something I would usually go for, but it has me so intrigued that I know I just have to read it at some point in my lifetime. Number 8, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. This is a gothic masterpiece, which is all I needed to hear before I put it on this list. I am a gothic lover. Jane Eyre is a story about temptation, passion, and dark secrets. It follows this girl, Jane Eyre, who is an orphan, and she lives with her very much heartless aunt until she is eventually hired as a governess for the young ward of a certain Mr. Rochester, which puts her in a very difficult position because she has to make the very hard decision to stay with Mr. Rochester and live with the consequences, or follow her convictions and potentially leave the love of her life. Number 9, Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. If you didn't see my last video, one, what are you doing? Go watch it, because I did a little vampire vlog where I read a bunch of vampire books, and I made it very clear that I am a vampire girly. So at some point in my life, I really would love to read Interview with a Vampire. This is sort of a modern classic when it comes to vampire novels. It follows the story of this guy named, to be honest, I don't know if it's Louis or Louis. I'm going to go with Louis. It is an interview with him as he describes how he was turned into a vampire and how he learns the vampire way of life. He eventually forms this alliance with a young girl named Claudia, who is turned into a vampire and then ultimately trapped in the body of a little girl from the age when she was turned into a vampire. It's about how they exist together and try and find their place in the world. Number 10, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Sticking with the theme of horror classics, The Haunting of Hill House is probably one of the most famous. It follows a group of people who stay there trying to uncover the hauntings of the manor. We have Dr. Montague, who is an occult scholar who is looking for evidence of the hauntings, his assistant Theodora, a fragile woman named Eleanor, who has experience with poltergeist herself, and the heir of the manor, Luke. As they're staying at Hill House, their experience is, of course, a little bit spooky and creepy, but then it suddenly takes a turn for the worse as they realize the true terror of this house as it is looking to claim one of them as its own. Number 11, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Again, another horror classic. Frankenstein, of course, follows the story of a scientist whose creation becomes a monster. I somehow was not forced to read this in high school, so I haven't got around to it yet, but I am very hopeful for the day I do read it that it will become a new favorite. Number 12, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. If you don't know, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens is one of my favorite books of all time. I actually don't think I've read any other Charles Dickens books. Kind of sounds similar to Great Expectations in some ways. It's the story of another young boy and the adventures of his life being impoverished in childhood and how he grows up to become a very successful novelist. Dickens himself has said that this is his favorite child, most likely because it is the story that was drawn most from his own experiences. I hope I enjoy it as much as I do Great Expectations. Number 13, The Stand by Stephen King. Allegedly, this is Stephen King's best book. I'll just have to be the judge. I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know much about The Stand, but I do know that first there is the plague, and from the plague comes dreams of darkness and the Dark Prince who is coming to bring about the apocalypse. Number 14, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Now, hopefully I will be reading this one very soon because I am tentatively planning to pick it up next. Rebecca is the story of this young woman who falls head over heels for this widower named Maxim de Winter. It isn't until they move into his massive country home that she realizes how much the ghost of his late wife, Rebecca, is going to haunt their marriage and potentially ruin it from beyond the grave. Number 15, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I am a big fan of Oscar Wilde. I have read and thoroughly enjoyed the importance of being earnest, as well as the Canterville ghost. This is the best of the best for him, from what I hear. It follows the story of Dorian Gray, who sort of makes a deal with the devil to sell his soul for eternal youth and beauty. He indulges in his secret desires in the night, all while remaining a perfect gentleman in the eyes of polite society. Only his portrait bears the trace of his decadence. Number 16, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is mandatory reading in the Sad Girl Lit canon, and thus I have to read it. It is said to be a haunting American classic. The Bell Jar follows the story of Esther Greenwood, who is beautiful, brilliant, successful, enormously talented, but she is slowly going under, maybe for the last time. Number 17, In True Blood by Truman Capote. On November 15th, 1959, 4 members of the Clutter family were shot to death by a shotgun in their own home, seemingly without any motive or any clue left behind. Capote reconstructs the murder and the investigation and the trial that leads to the execution of the killers. This is based on a true story, and I have heard that it is horrific. I'm not usually a fan of true crime, but I've heard that this is sort of a classic within the genre. Number 18, Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. If you don't know, The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides is my favorite book of all time. I want to read every single book that Jeffrey Eugenides ever writes. I've heard Middlesex is fantastic and has a truly wonderful narrator. Middlesex is the story of Calliope Stephanides and 3 generations of her Greek American family. To understand why Calliope is not like the other girls, she has to uncover a guilty family secret and the astonishing genetic history that turns Calliope into Cal. I don't know much more about the book, but it is, of course, a discussion on gender. Number 19, The Master and the Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. One hot spring, the devil arrives in Moscow with a retinue that contains a beautiful naked witch and a black cat that has a proclivity for playing chess and vodka. That's all I really know about The Master and the Margarita. I also know that this is my favorite book cover of all time. And admittedly, that is what first sparked my interest in the book and what has held me captivated for so many years after discovering it. Number 20, Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann. The story follows 3 women, Anne, Neely, and Jennifer, who become best friends and ultimately rise within the entertainment industry. I believe the story is a critique on the entertainment industry. I don't really know though. I have been interested in reading it probably since I was in middle school listening to Marina and the Diamonds. I didn't know what the she was talking about. I still don't, but I intend to find out. Number 21, Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. This book is just such a unique premise, which is what has really captured my interest. Biography of X is a fake biography. It is fiction, but it weaves nonfiction and fiction together. X is an artist and writer who one day drops dead. Their wife is devastated, filled with grief. She decides to write the biography of X. But the thing about X is that they were very secretive in their personal life, so their wife doesn't even really know all the details. So I think the story is her sort of uncovering that. As far as I know, it's just a very unique format. Like, I know there are a lot of photos within the book as well. It's supposed to look and read like a real biography, but there is some sort of mystery weaved throughout it. Number 22, All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. If you had asked me a few years ago if I was interested in this book, I would have told you absolutely not. I do like war books sometimes. I enjoy the occasional historical fiction, but I wasn't interested in this book until I saw the 2022 movie adaptation. The story takes place in 1914 during the First World War in a room full of German schoolboys, fresh-faced and idealistic. They are goaded by their teacher to join the glorious war. With the fire and patriotism of youth, they sign up only to quickly be met with the very much real horrors of war. Number 23, The Memory Police by Yōko Ogawa. In the story, objects begin disappearing. First, it's small things like hats, ribbons, birds, roses, but then it becomes a much more serious problem. Most of the people are oblivious to the changes, except for a handful of people who live in fear of the memory police. The memory police are the people who make sure that the objects that disappear stay forgotten. The premise of the story reminds me a lot of Fahrenheit 451. I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like it is a story about censorship, which always intrigues me when it's explored in literature. Number 24. The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I just had to include one fantasy on the list, even if I'm not really a fantasy reader. This is, of course, an epic fantasy novel that I believe follows 3 different women in this magical queendom. Slay. Queen Sabran IX needs to produce an heir in order to protect her realm from destruction. Assassins are getting closer and closer to her door. I'm particularly interested in this one because it seems to be so female driven. I feel like, and this is of course as someone who doesn't read a lot of fantasy, that a lot of fantasy follows the story of men. Like a lot of the main characters in high fantasy are men, warriors going on their hero's journey, which is cool and all, but I want to hear about women in fantasy. I hope this lives up to my expectations. And last but not least, at number 25, I have The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is a post-apocalyptic story of a father and a son making their way through burned America. They have nothing except each other, a pistol, the clothes on their backs, and a cart full of scavenged food. I've heard so much about how profoundly moving this story is. I've heard it's a must-read for anyone even considering being a parent someday. The Road boldly imagines a future where no hope remains and the tenderness that keeps 2 people alive in the face of total devastation. I've heard the writing is just gorgeous in this book, and that's something that I am really interested in, and I think it's going to get a good cry out of me, and I do love that. So yes. And there we have it. Those are the 25 books I want to read before I die. Yes, this list is absolutely subject to change. Hopefully I will get through a lot of these sooner rather than later. But you know what? I will be excited to look back on this video in a few years and see how much my interests have changed and how much I've gotten through. I think the cool thing about making a list like this is that they are books that you're so interested in that I think it transcends your momentary reading interest or taste. Have you ever thought about making a list like this? If you have, please share below what some of your top books are that you want to get through before you die. Thank you very much for watching and hanging out with me, and of course, celebrating my birthday with me. So with that, signing off, and I hope I will see you in the next one.